Welcome to another exciting edition of the Big Ten Sports Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Wade, and I'm joined here by my co-host, Ryan Thielen. And it's been a few weeks since we've talked a little bit, Ryan. So how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing okay, man. Obviously, the betting isn't going very well for me, but besides that, things are good.
Yeah, and I mean,
Nebraska won 2 games. We haven't been on since that happened. So,
I was just gonna say an interesting trend is we haven't talked about football, and Nebraska started winning. But
I know.
I'd like to pretend like we had a say in that or a play in that, but I think Nebraska just finally started playing a little bit better and more up to what they actually can play like.
Yeah, I mean, I think for them it was getting the first one out of the way, and then they had an easy game after they beat Minnesota against Becky and Cookman, and then showed pretty well against Ohio State last week. So we'll talk about all that later, but encouraging signs at least, which makes me a little bit happier.
Yeah, there's always next year.
There is always next. We've been saying that for like 20 years, but it's
Yeah,
true.
well, that's because you guys have high expectations. If you're an Iowa fan, 8-4 is solid, and that is a good year.
That's probably what they'll end up at this year. So congrats.
I never mind. Anyways, I mean, I don't agree with that, but we can talk about that as we discuss the Iowa Northwestern game here in a few minutes. Jumping into our first segment, we're going to have three segments today. The first one is going to be talking about our betting, which, spoiler alert, I'm still better than Ryan at. Then we're going to jump into segment number two, which is going to be talking about the highlights of the games last week. We typically have a third segment, which is going to be, the mascots, draft picks, and Kansas Watch, but we want to try to keep this a little bit shorter for y'all. So we're going to be kind of cutting out a few of those, but we're definitely keeping the Kansas Watch. And then finally, on the fourth segment, we're going to be talking about next week's games. So jumping into segment one with the betting, as I alluded to just a few seconds ago, I am still better than Ryan. My predictions last week went 4-4. I won the Michigan, Michigan State, Illinois, and Iowa games. I wish the Iowa game would have actually been a win, but it did count technically in the betting. And Ryan went 2-6, and you only won Michigan State and Iowa. You did
Yeah, it was
not do
bad.
very well.
No, I've got this thing going now where I'm always going to pick a couple games against you that I don't believe because that's the only way that I'm going to try and catch up. And last week those games did not work. So
It's kind of
39
like
and 41, and then it's probably going to get worse.
it's kind of like when a team's behind and they're throwing up like the last second Hail Mary, or they're kind of just chucking the ball down the field like willy nilly, and one out of every 30 times they win the game, and the other 29 times they lose as they should. And I feel like you're one of those 29 times.
I mean, so far, but it's going to change, and the next 2 weeks are going to be one of those 1 in 30 weeks. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I still have a 6 game lead on you, and considering there's
I
only
know.
7 games, 8 games a week, you've got to pick pretty much every game against me.
I've been waiting. I've been waiting for this moment.
Do we have a bet on this, by the way? Because this would be a really good one for me to win.
No, we don't, and I'm not going to make one now.
Well, that's fair. I just feel like we had to have had a bet on this. This would be something I would stupidly say
All
I
right, you
should
know
bet
what?
you
You
on.
should go back and listen to everything that we've recorded so far, and if you find something, let me know. But I'm pretty
Dude,
sure we don't have anything on this.
don't try me, man. I will.
You
I
don't
will
have time
find
to
it.
do that.
Also fair. All right, jumping into segment two, the highlights from last week. Just giving a quick rundown. Iowa lost a disappointing game to Purdue that shouldn't have happened. uh, the big key coming into this game was Iowa needing to stop DJ Knox and Rondell Moore. They did a fantastic job of that, but then they let some random junior college transfer named Terry White torch them for 190 yards and 3 touchdowns. And so that was pretty embarrassing.
Yeah,
The
so I think the cool thing about that with Purdue though is like, everybody got all hyped on Rondell Moore after the Ohio State game, and rightly so. And I think people have been dedicating a lot to stopping him, and Purdue's more than a one-person team, and since the start of the season when they went 0-3, they've only lost one other game. So it's not that bad of a loss for Iowa, but it does, I think, essentially put them out of the race in the Big Ten West. I know you've got crazy scenarios that we talked about that they can actually win it, but that one hurts.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm the antagonist of anything weird, crazy happening, like Kansas winning 6 games. But even I don't think this is a possibility. And as far as the Rondell Moore stuff, you're absolutely right. Iowa literally had people pretending to be Rondale Moore on their scout team just so they could prepare against him, and they did a fantastic job.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, keynote for Purdue is that their first two losses, David Blah wasn't actually playing. So, I mean, since he's taken over as a starter, they've only lost 2 games, and not that bad of games either. So they were still in that Michigan State game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we could be talking about a top ranked Purdue team at this point. And I think it shows. I know it's ridiculous, but it shows in the CFP rankings as well that the committee actually values Purdue a little bit higher than a few other teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have my own issues with the rankings, and we'll talk about one of those a little bit later on with Michigan State again. But they're also not showing respect to a team like Northwestern, and I understand 4 losses, but the rankings themselves from like 15 on to me just don't make sense. But those are rankings that really don't matter that much, anyways. So moving on, Nebraska played Ohio State, I think, a lot tougher than most people thought, and that includes myself. The line last week, since we didn't record, was 18 points against Nebraska last week, just because I didn't think there was any chance they were going to keep it close. But they had a good game plan. So Nebraska, kind of like what Iowa did with Rondale Moore, kind of picked their poison against Ohio State and said, we're going to try and not let Dwayne Haskins beat us, and that worked for the most part. That was probably the worst I've seen Haskins play this year. But the problem for Nebraska was that Ohio State still has 2 pro caliber rushers in Dobbins and Weber, and Dobbins had a big game. But Nebraska losing at Ohio State by only 5 points, I think, is more hopeful than anything. And Adrian Martinez, just a fun fact there, he has the second most total offensive yards of any true freshman in the country this year. So encouraging signs with Nebraska, especially, the last few weeks when they got a couple wins and then actually had a chance to win at Ohio State, which never would have happened under Mike Riley.
Yeah, that's impressive. Do you know who's number one?
I don't know who number one is. I'll have to look that up.
I mean, that sucks if we don't know who number one is.
He'll be number one for sophomores next year.
Oh, okay. I think for me, the takeaway from this game is shit. Iowa doesn't have an easy win at the end of their schedule. That that when I saw that, I was like, this is not good.
I mean,
Nebraska's actually starting
we'll
to figure
see.
it out.
Yeah, we'll see. I think we're gonna figure some stuff out about Nebraska this week. They're no longer bowl eligible, or they don't have a possibility of being bowl eligible. So we'll see, how much they actually care the rest of the way. With Scott Frost, I think they'll care quite a bit, but we'll find out. And then they get Michigan State before Iowa too. So I agree with you, but we'll see what the culture is like down in Lincoln the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, in an ideal scenario, they beat Michigan State. Too excited from that and get smoked by Iowa, and that would help Iowa immensely.
That is
But
not an ideal scenario. But anyways,
it is. So the Wisconsin Badgers beat Rutgers. The score looked a lot closer than it was, but still a little closer than it should have been regardless. They were up 27-3 heading into the fourth. I think the big thing here is I don't understand Wisconsin. Like I feel like they were ranked top 10 at the beginning of the season, and at this point it's kind of like, what are we playing for? Right? Like you have such high expectations. They're just kind of coasting through the season, I feel like, because a Rutgers team, they should have been able to beat them by 40.
they should have, and they probably could have. I think what Wisconsin's still trying to figure out, or at least will be figuring out for the next 3 games, is what are they doing at quarterback? So Hornibrook's hurt, and honestly, there's not that much of a drop off seemingly between him and Cone. So I think they need to figure that out. Unfortunately, they have to play Penn State this week, and that's not a good time to figure it out. But for all of Wisconsin's flaws this year, they're 4-2 in the conference, 6-3 overall. And if Northwestern stumbles, they do still have a chance to win the division, but they pretty much need Northwestern to lose twice. So they do have a little bit to play for. They still get Purdue, but yeah, I think they're going to try and figure out, what their future looks like at quarterback, because they do have a pretty good true freshman coming in next year. And Hornibrook is potentially their all-time leading touchdown passer who might actually get benched as a senior. So that'd be kind of a weird scenario, but
I
they
feel
need
like
to figure that out.
I feel like he's been there forever.
I mean, he kind of has.
Yeah, I remember him, like when I was in Madison, he was I don't know. It's crazy. Moving on though, Minnesota got their butts kicked by Illinois. I don't think we need to touch on this game too much, other than to be honest, it seems like Illinois is kind of figuring out what they can do to make them competitive. I feel like they've kind of realized and adapted at this point to understand that their team may not be the most talented, but if they can control the clock, do some deceptive type running plays, that they can and utilize AJ Bush obviously, they can actually stay pretty competitive in games. So it's nice to see Illinois not being a gimme win, but it's also Minnesota. Minnesota has been playing pretty terrible down the stretch. So
Yeah, I don't know. You look at the teams that Illinois beat. There's Minnesota, Purdue, or not, excuse me, not Purdue, Minnesota, Rutgers, Western Illinois, and Kent State. I mean, I'm not really seeing anybody on that list that would be surprising, especially given how far Minnesota's fallen since the start of the season. So yeah, with
I mean,
with Illinois' remaining schedule, I don't see them making it to 6 wins. But yeah, 4 wins is an improvement for them, even if they're beating garbage teams to do it.
yeah, I mean, I think before in the beginning of the season we agreed that we didn't think they'd win more than 2 games. So four is double that. Good for them. I
That's
can do math.
true.
Yeah.
Good math, buddy. Yeah.
Some people who can do math pretty well. Northwestern, the only private school in the Big Ten, they played Notre Dame this past week in kind of an interesting matchup that I think threw some regular college football fans, maybe not some dead, maybe not so in the weeds college football fans, but I had a lot of people asking, what does Northwestern's loss against Notre Dame mean for Iowa? And it means literally nothing. This game meant nothing other than is Northwestern going to be legit in front of the committee. They really needed that win, I think, in my opinion,
hmm
to jump onto the CFP rankings. Otherwise, they just look like an anomaly. They look like this team who has gotten lucky in Big Ten conference play and literally can't win a game out of the conference. And they are going to be, as you even alluded to, maybe a 5-loss West champ. And honestly, there's a slight chance they could be 6-6 and still win the West, right? Like there's
Yeah.
a decent chance that it's going to be a smoke show when they play either Ohio State or Michigan because they're just not that good.
I mean, you say that, but then I mean, look at what they did against Notre Dame, and look at what they already did against Michigan. And look, they beat Michigan State, they beat Wisconsin. So yeah, they might end up with 5 or 6 losses and be a West champ, which is kind of depressing for the Big Ten West. But when they started the season, they didn't have a healthy Clayton Thorson. Their running attack has changed quite a bit. In Northwestern, we talk about it all the time. They're a team that plays to the level of their competition. So if they do end up winning the West, I don't anticipate them getting destroyed like maybe some other teams would. But yeah, and they're not gonna win that game, but they're gonna potentially keep it competitive. And then it would be even sadder is if they go in 6-6, lose, and then they go to a bowl game at 6-7.
Yeah, it's embarrassing. It's a bad look.
It is a bad look.
um, all right, moving on to the next game. Penn State lost to Michigan pretty bad. Obviously, I think this has a couple things. I think Michigan is a pretty good team. I'm starting to jump on the bandwagon there. Obviously, they still haven't played a ton of real good teams. I'd like to see how they face up against Ohio State, but they still beat Penn State pretty bad. With that being said, Trace McSorley went out against Iowa with a knee injury and came back a few series later and didn't look exactly the same. And it sounded like I didn't get a chance to watch a lot of this game, but it sounded like he didn't look the same against Michigan either. It wasn't the same dynamic Trace McSorley. So that's definitely something interesting to watch because as much as I hate on Penn State and Trace McSorley, he really is kind of the person that gets that team going.
He is. It would not have mattered against Michigan. I think Michigan's defense is just that good. I watched some of this game, and then after the third quarter, I turned it off because the game was 28-0 at that point. The thing that I'll say about Michigan, and I don't know if you remember this, but at the beginning of the season when we first started doing this, I said that I think Michigan's the best team, and it's going to be the season that they get over the hump with Harbaugh, and then they went out and lost to Notre Dame the first week. And you laughed and said that that wasn't going to happen, and you overreacted. Michigan looks like they are the best team in the conference, and we're going to find that out in 3 weeks here when they play Ohio State. But I think for Michigan, the scariest thing for them is if they win out and Alabama loses to Georgia in the game, there's a pretty high probability they still would not make the college football playoff. So they have to
Yeah,
take care of their business. They did that obviously last week against Penn State, and they just have to, hope that Alabama beats Georgia.
yeah. I mean, a couple thoughts I have on that. First, I heard that dig you threw at me. I didn't appreciate it. Yes, I may have overreacted to Michigan, but that is my personality, and I overreact to everything. So, first off, screw you. I
That
think let's
doesn't make it okay.
let's point back to the fact that I'm better at betting than you. And then the second piece is there's no way Alabama's losing a game this year. That team is absurd. They have so much talent. There's another podcast I listen to, and they're literally doing a segment of if we take the top 22 best players from every other team in the NCAA, could they beat Alabama? They're actually going to do a
Yes,
show on that. I don't know, man. Alabama's pretty good.
getting good. No, they watch the draft the next couple seasons, and Alabama probably has like three guys maybe go in the first round. So
Bullcrap.
you're telling me you want to take those other 28, 29 guys, and
Dude,
it's not going to matter?
Alabama has three people projected in like the top 10.
Okay, so
I'll,
fine.
I'll
Give them 10 guys.
prop bet
They're
over
still they're
under.
still outmatched
I don't prop bet over under 6 guys from Alabama drafted in the first round this year.
this year.
Yep.
This year,
Yeah.
under.
I got the over. I'll bet you a beer.
All right, you're gonna owe me a lot of beer. You might win the betting, but you're gonna owe me a lot of beer.
At least I win the Pride Award. Uh, the last team or last game on our highlights is Michigan State beating Maryland 24-3. DJ Durkin is officially out at Maryland after some weird controversies there. The big thing for me is Maryland's rushing attack is a good ploy if they have some athletic people and no one who can throw the ball. But against teams who are able to stay home and stay true to their assignments, it's not going to be effective. They have officially scored 3 points against the two best rushing defenses in the Big Ten, Michigan State and Iowa. So, Maryland, good for you. You're finding a way to win games against bad teams, but it's not going to work to get you over the hump.
Yeah, I think for Maryland, their goal now is bowl eligibility and getting through the season with a situation that's been probably pretty tough for those players and the rest of the staff that's still there. I think Canada's done a pretty good job, all things considered. So, yeah, they got beat, but if they get to 6 or 7 wins, I think that's success for them.
Absolutely. Another team that we are watching as we jump into segment number 3 is the Kansas Jayhawks, who lost to Iowa State, and they are about to put their bowl eligibility in jeopardy. But they play Kansas State this week, and I think there's a chance they get on the winning track. So they could be 4-6 after 10 weeks, which means I'm very, very much still alive in this betting. And they also
You're
fired,
not.
but they also fired their coach. So maybe not so ideal, or maybe that gives them some inspiration. Who knows at this point? All
So
I know is I'm going to owe a
they
lot of
have,
people beer.
yeah, they have three. The bet was that they have to get to 6 wins and become bowl eligible. They have to win their last 3 games, which are at Kansas State, at Oklahoma, who's ranked sixth in the country, and at home against Texas. Like, as soon as they lose one of those, I think we need to stop talking about Kansas because it's over. Then yeah, I don't think they're going to beat Kansas State this week, even though it's they're both 1-5. It's a rivalry game, but yeah, it's Kansas, so they'll find a way to lose.
Well, it's a good thing they're not going to lose the next 3 games, so we can keep them on our docket.
Dude, if they beat Oklahoma and Texas, I'll buy you 10 beers.
I love it. Double or
All right.
nothing, and I owe nothing. All right. The other thing is, I think we kind of talked about this a little bit before, but we're going to touch on bowl projections after next week. A lot of different scenarios in play. As I can attest to, it took me a while to figure out where Iowa might be playing at, and that was just one team. So it'll be interesting to talk through some of the bowl projections, especially as we get a little bit more clarity after this week.
I do know where Nebraska's going. They are going nowhere.
Good for them. They get to spend Christmas at home with their families because they're
That's
too poor
right.
of a football team to actually play well during the regular
That's
season.
not. All right.
All right, moving into our last segment, we're going to touch on each of the upcoming games. We are going to make our predictions. And if you've learned anything from the first 10 weeks of this podcast, if Ryan and I pick differently on a game, you should be betting on the game that I pick because I win. So Moving on to the very first game is Maryland at Indiana. Indiana's favored by 2.5 points. This will be really interesting. Indiana's been kind of an up and down team, and honestly, I know they've lost quite a few games already this year. I believe they're 4-5, but I felt like they played Iowa pretty tough. They have some really good pieces on their team, and they go against a Maryland team, as we talked about a few seconds ago, that runs the ball extremely well. Um, Against Iowa, Indiana did a pretty good job of bottling up the run, and Iowa's running offense isn't necessarily spectacular, but it's usually pretty solid. So I think it's really going to come down to whether they can stop Maryland's run or not. Because if you stop Maryland's run, that game's over. They can't score the ball. They can't throw the ball. So at this point, I'm taking Indiana at home. I think they're going to do a pretty good job of staying true to their assignments. And their middle linebacker, their coach's kid, is a fantastic guy over the middle who can kind of wrap things up and keep the defense honest. So
Yeah, so I mean, the big thing for me this week was something that you said. I think it's a matchup game. Um, Maryland's averaging over 220 yards a game rushing, but that's Indiana's strength defensively. Indiana has lost 4 straight games, and so they need a couple wins to become bowl eligible. Maryland only needs one more win. Indiana's favored 2.5 in this one, despite having lost those 4 games in a row. But I agree with you. I think Indiana is going to win this game, and I'm going to take Indiana to cover.
I love, man. Just every game you pick with me is one less chance you have of beating me.
That's true, but I can't pick against things that I actually believe. So
That's fair. I do it
we'll
all the
we'll
time.
catch
It
up a
usually
different
works
way.
out.
I know you do, and it works every time, and it pisses me off.
All right, so Illinois is going to Nebraska. Nebraska is favored by 17. I can kind of let you cover this a little bit more. You obviously have a lot more information on Nebraska. The one thing I want to say is that, as we mentioned earlier, Illinois is really kind of reinventing themselves with the running game. They're utilizing AJ Bush significantly in the running game. I think he was their leading rusher last week, or maybe in a couple weeks. But and against who they beat last week? Minnesota. Sorry, against Minnesota. I was drawing a complete blank, but against Minnesota last week, the running back Reggie Corbin averaged 16.4 yards per carry with 13 carries, I believe, which is absolutely insane. So I'm kind of interested to see how Nebraska handles that. Again, I think it's kind of a gimmicky thing that a good team, not saying that's Nebraska because we know that's not true, but a good team can stay at home and kind of stop some of that. So interested to hear what your thoughts are on this game.
Yeah, I think it's the type of game that Nebraska has to start winning. I think Scott Frost talks a lot about culture, and winning is a culture. So if you want to get some momentum going into next year, despite the fact that they can't be bowl eligible, I think this is where it has to start. Over the past few weeks, obviously encouraging signs with Nebraska. And Illinois' defense is really terrible. So I think the big question for this week is, can Illinois slow down Nebraska's offense? Nebraska over the past 3 weeks is averaging over 40 points a game. Granted, the first game was against Minnesota, who Illinois also torched, and then Bethune Cookman, but Nebraska could have put up about 70 that game if they wanted to. And then, the fact that Nebraska started moving the ball and put up the yards they did against Ohio State, who isn't a great defense, but in Columbus is obviously going to be a tough opponent. Um, I don't think Illinois is going to be able to slow down Nebraska at all. I think Adrian Martinez is growing every single week. Made a couple bad mistakes last week, but I think that's the pressure of playing in Columbus. And, he's back at home this week, and Divino Zigbo is running the ball like a man. I don't think there's any way Illinois
I'm a
keeps this
man. I'm
close.
40.
Come after me. No, but he is good. And then, Zigbo was a guy that started in kind of a questionable situation this year, not knowing where he was going to land on the depth chart. He's the lead guy now. Maurice Washington's the number 2. And I think Nebraska's got an identity now. They've kind of become a running team, but a running team in a very different way than the traditional Nebraska teams used to operate, obviously, with the option and the triple option and everything. Nebraska's favored 17 this week against Illinois. Illinois, beats bad teams. You could argue Nebraska's a bad team, but I think Nebraska's a team that's moving in the right direction and has given fans reason to be optimistic. So I think Nebraska's going to pull away in the second half, and I'll take Nebraska giving 17 to Illinois.
I love it. I'm picking Illinois for two reasons. One, because if they win, I would love to be the one who said I called it. Two, because I really like number one as a reason.
I'm gonna feel it's the worst part is with all the crap that I gave Illinois at the start of the season. If they beat Nebraska, then that's just gonna make it that much worse.
Yeah, one thing you said earlier, I really loved how you said they're averaging over 40 points a game, and then you pointed to Minnesota and Bethune Cookman. That was like that's part of that little statistics that's such a bad
I'm
stat.
honest, man. I can't mislead people.
I mean, you kind of did. You started out with saying they're averaging over 40 points a game. But
Okay,
any,
but let me tell you why that's relevant. Is because they're playing Illinois, who's no better on defense than either of those teams.
a little bit, but it just made Nebraska seem so much better than they were.
Fine.
All right. Wisconsin at Penn State. Kind of the big thing I think here is what are they going to do at quarterback for Wisconsin and honestly for Penn State. So Trace McSorley has been kind of hampered by an injury. It's decreasing his effectiveness. They kind of like we talked about. It kind of runs through him. He's a dual threat playmaker who can do a lot of damage on the ground as he can kind of in the air. He keeps teams honest at least. And on the Wisconsin side, Alex Hornibrook has been injured the last 2 weeks. Jack Cohn has been performing pretty well with Wisconsin, but it seems like Wisconsin is utilizing this opportunity to kind of get back to the roots and really emphasize the ground game. Also, another reason why they probably didn't run the score up as much against Rutgers. Jonathan Taylor had over 200 yards on the ground, and I want to say he's averaging around 9 to 10 yards per carry in that game. So definitely an interesting matchup that we have here. Both teams are 6-3, and it's gonna, at least from an Iowa perspective, this is a really big game. Um, I think it was interesting that Wisconsin wasn't ranked in the college football playoff ranking at 6-3 with a head-to-head victory over Iowa. So it looks like the committee's kind of taking the BYU loss pretty poorly, and honestly, the Northwestern loss too. Um, it seems like they just don't really give a crap about Northwestern, which is fine with me, but I don't want to give it any chances. Penn State also is competing with Iowa for one of the top tier bowls in the Big Ten, so it'll be an interesting matchup. Penn State is actually favored by 8 points. I do not think that Wisconsin's going to win, but I do think they're going to cover the 8 points. I think that's too big of a spread. I think it's going to be a really good game and one that I'm going to enjoy watching on Saturday.
I like that you talk about Penn State competing with Iowa for the Bulls. They're also competing with Wisconsin for the Bulls, who currently has a better record in the conference than Iowa.
It doesn't
So
matter if they're
way
not
to
ranked in the CFP, man.
way to get that Iowa point in there for literally no reason.
I think that point makes a lot of sense.
It does not.
Penn State's ranked higher than Iowa right now. That is huge.
Yeah, and
Wisconsin's not. So
guess what happens if Wisconsin beats Penn State, who beat Iowa? Those rankings probably flip.
I don't.
Anyways, I
Mm,
we're not getting into this right now. For me, this goes back to matchups, and it's something that you touched on a little bit. Yeah, Wisconsin. Excuse me. Wisconsin has question marks at quarterback. They don't really know what's going to go on there this week. But we do know what's going to happen. Jonathan Taylor is going to get the ball between 25 and 30 times. Penn State's weakness this year in the Big Ten is on the ground. They're 10th against the run in the conference, and Wisconsin's leading the conference in rushing. I think Penn State might win, but I think 8 is too many points given the fact that I think it's going to be a grinded out type game. They're not going to have a lot of chances with the ball if Wisconsin can control the clock. So I'm going to take Wisconsin to cover.
Ryan, so far you've only picked one game differently than me. Just wanted to throw it out
Yep.
there.
Thanks.
Yep. All right. So we have the Ohio State versus Michigan State game. I think we have a few choice words for the CFP rankings for this, which we can touch on here in a second. The spread is only 3.5 points. Michigan State's only getting 3.5 points against Ohio State. I know Ohio State's going home or going on the road to Michigan State, but they're a much better team than Michigan State. The one interesting thing I will say here is that Ohio State's offense runs through the running backs. So as much as Dwayne Haskins will put up 400 yards, a lot of it's set up by the running game they have and the different type of ways they utilize the offense to get the ball into the playmakers' hands. And Michigan State's defense is actually pretty solid when it comes to rush defense. They're number one in the nation. I still don't know how much I value that. They haven't played well against good teams, good running teams, but they have bottled up some other teams, such as Maryland. The other thing I think that's kind of key here is that Michigan State is playing Brian Lewerke. Um, this is after Rocky Lombardi, the freshman quarterback for Michigan State, led them to a victory over Purdue. So I'm not really sure kind of what the reasoning is here, other than Brian Lewerke is a multi-year starter, but he's been playing pretty terrible this year. So with that being said, I don't see how Ohio State doesn't beat Michigan State by 2 touchdowns at least. I think Michigan State's a lot worse in the ranking. I think Ohio State is a good team that's just kind of going through a somewhat of a slump just because they kind of ruined their chance. I mean, there's still a good chance for them to make the CFP playoffs if they beat Michigan and some weird things don't happen in the SEC. But I feel like at this point they're kind of just sitting there like, what the heck do we do? I think this is the game where they rebound, get it back on track, and they beat Michigan State pretty bad.
I don't think there's a lot of chance that Ohio State gets back in the CFP race unless they pretty much dominate Michigan. I mean, there's too many teams ahead of them right now. Like you look at like Oklahoma. If Oklahoma doesn't lose again, Washington State is ranked ahead of them right now, along with West Virginia. It's going to take a lot for Ohio State to move back up, just given how they've played the last couple of times when they lost to Purdue and then squeaked by a Nebraska team that's 2-7. What I want to touch on here is something that you alluded to. Michigan State is ranked 18th in the CFP rankings right now. I mean, they have one okay win, and that okay win was against a Penn State team who's 6-3. Um, Lost to Northwestern, lost to Michigan in a game that they lost by 14, which wasn't really close. Lost to Arizona State, which looks like a bad loss now. So it's been a theme all year, but I don't get the love for Michigan State at all. Ohio State's been struggling, but I think they're too balanced of a team for Michigan State, who's gonna have to pick one or another. And given that their strength is against the run, I think they're gonna try and slow down the running attack. And I mean, Haskins had a tough game last week, but he's still really good. I don't really understand why the spread is only 3.5 for this. And I know I typically say, when there's a spread that you don't understand, it's probably because Vegas knows something, and typically that's the case. But I just can't get my head around this one. I think Ohio State. I mean, if they are gonna push for a playoff spot, they're gonna have to start putting those dominating performances together like they started the season with, and maybe that starts here. But even if it doesn't, I don't think 3.5 is enough, despite the fact that Ohio State struggled last week. So, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to agree with you again and pick Ohio State.
I love it. Just a couple of things of note. I was looking at their schedule, Michigan State, and their only notable wins is they beat Utah State, the Utah State Aggies, which are 8-1 but not ranked,
They could have lost that game,
which they
though.
could have lost. Agreed. They beat Penn State, so okay, and then they beat Purdue, which honestly, the way Iowa's ranked, I feel like the committee is really valuing Purdue and what they've done so far this season. So
Yeah,
just
yeah, but they won't rank Purdue.
yeah, I mean, you can't rank a 5-4 team.
They're ranking 6-3 teams at 18.
Well, there's not a lot. There's a lot of 6-3 teams.
They're ranking 6-3 teams at 15.
There's a lot of 6-3 teams.
They're ranking 5-3 Iowa State at 22.
Iowa State's good. Don't you be talking about Iowa State.
Purdue has a better win than Iowa State.
No, they don't. Well, okay. Well, sorry, I got a little aggressive there. Iowa State has more better wins.
More better wins. All
I
right.
don't. Okay, so they let me just they beat number 9 West Virginia. Okay. Oh man, that's it.
Yeah, I mean that's a good win. West Virginia's back up to ninth after they beat Texas, but
They beat a ranked
I still don't
Oklahoma
see
State team when they
I
were
still don't
ranked.
see that as a better win than dominating Ohio State. And beating the team when they're ranked means literally nothing. Like
I
just because you're ranked one week of the season, you could be crap.
I agree, but I think sometimes with you have the human error, it can definitely come into play.
Oh, so it's an error. All right, I agree.
Whatever. I'm winning the betting, and that's all that matters to me.
Whatever.
Purdue. Let's keep going. Purdue at Minnesota. The spread is Minnesota is getting 12 points, but Purdue is going to Minnesota. A couple things of note here. Purdue has a lot of playmakers, and the big thing so far has been just try to stop DJ Knox and Rondell Moore. But what Purdue proved against Iowa is that you can stop Rondell Moore, but they have just a plethora of JUCO transfers that apparently just keep popping up out of freaking nowhere and can put up points. So now it kind of makes the team a little bit more diverse. And it also, I'll give credit to Purdue. They did a really good job of game planning and finding what the weakness is of the Iowa defense and attacking it. So definitely some good playmakers on the Purdue side. I don't think Minnesota's defense can stop that. And I think PJ Fleck realized that as well. He fired his defensive coordinator last week, but is that really going to be the kind of end all be all that gets this ship going in the right direction? I highly doubt it. Even though it's 12 points, Purdue's going to Minnesota, and Minnesota plays a little better at home. I'm still taking Purdue to win pretty big in this game.
Yeah, I don't disagree with most of what you said. I do think there's a little bit of a question mark of Purdue going on the road to Minnesota and having to cover 12 points, just because the last time they went on the road to Michigan State, they lost by 10. And that offense did get shut down. Obviously, Michigan State has a way better defense than Minnesota does. But for no other reason than I have to pick against you on some games, and 12 points is a lot to be getting on the road. I'm going to go with Minnesota to cover 12. I don't believe it, but I got to do it.
That's fair. I mean, I think that's a good call. Minnesota's 4-1 at home, so
yep.
Their only loss being against Iowa.
And I will get Iowa.
I'll find a way to get Iowa and everything.
I know you will.
And moving on to Iowa, we have Northwestern at Iowa. Iowa is favored by 10 points, which is a pretty big spread considering Northwestern has Iowa's number. In the Kirk Ferentz era, Northwestern is 9-8, and in a press conference earlier this week, Kirk said that this really should be a rivalry game, and it really feels like it. Or at least I hate Northwestern. If you had to list every single Big Ten team, I would probably say Wisconsin's number one and Northwestern's number two in terms of teams I hate, because Northwestern finds a way to ruin Iowa's seasons every single time. Like in 2009, Iowa was ranked 8-0 and ranked in the top 10. They injured Ricky Stanzi, beat Iowa, and then Iowa ended up losing against Ohio State the next week with the backup quarterback and went 10-2. And yes, I'm still bitter. It's annoying, but the tides have turned. This is an opportunity for Iowa to kind of maybe put a damper on Northwestern's season. I think if Northwestern finishes 8-4, goes into the Big Ten West Championship game and plays well, that could bode really well for them getting a good bowl game. But if they lose to Iowa and maybe fall against Minnesota the next week, we could be looking at a Northwestern team that's 7-5, 6-6 heading into the Big Ten West conference championship game. So definitely an interesting thing there. I think Iowa needs to get their tight ends more involved, and it'll be interesting because I don't understand Northwestern because their defense isn't great. They're 51st in the nation, and their leading rusher is retired from about 6 games ago. They still haven't gotten anyone to get over 400 yards rushing. And Clayton Thorson looks like Trevor Siemian from his senior year at Northwestern. He's about even with his interceptions to touchdown ratio. So on paper, this should be an easy win for Iowa. I hate to do this. I'm actually going to pick Northwestern to cover the spread. I do think Iowa's going to win the game, though.
I really wish you wouldn't have picked Northwestern. After all that talk about this should be an easy win for Iowa, blah, 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 and Northwestern's not really that good. I can't believe you just did that. It's Northwestern, though. I get what you're saying. Like, they don't get blown out unless you're Akron. And Akron, I guess, only beat them by 5. But they lost to Michigan by 3. I mean, they lost to Notre Dame by 10. And against the spread, these are actually two of the better teams in the Big Ten. Iowa's 6-3 and Northwestern's 4-3 and somehow has 2 pushes on the year. So their spreads get hit pretty close. God, I really
Doesn't
don't
it
want
just
to
pain you?
It really does pain me.
On paper, picking Iowa makes sense, man.
On paper, it does not, because Northwestern does not get blown out, and 10 points is a lot. God, it's an afternoon game, too. If it was a night game, I might pick Iowa, but I just can't do it. I have to pick Northwestern.
I love how I backed you into a corner there.
I know. I can't believe you didn't pick Iowa.
It was tough, but
I thought that was for sure going to be one that I could get.
No, I'm smarter than that. Like, this is a really scary game for me This is a huge game on Iowa's schedule. And
Northwestern, I hear what you're saying though when you say they're not good. Like they beat Rutgers by 3 points.
yeah,
They just don't
they
they
should
don't
have
get
lost
blown
to
out though.
Nebraska.
They should have lost to Nebraska. We don't
Uh,
need to talk about that again, but
all right. The last game, this might be a little bit easier or harder, I guess, if you look at the spread. But Michigan going to Rutgers. Michigan is one of the top teams in the country. They are favored by 39 points on the road. That is so freaking large that I actually don't think I can pick Michigan in this just because I feel like what they're going to do is they're going to get up by 4 or 5 touchdowns and they're going to put every single backup in, which granted their backups are better than Rutgers. Actually, that may. You know what? Screw it. I'm taking Michigan. Dylan
oh
McCaffrey
god.
is going to score multiple touchdowns this game.
This is his moment.
This is his moment.
Yeah. This is another tough one just because of the spread like you talked about. I'm gonna take Rutgers. I know I said I would never pick Rutgers again. Actually, scratch that. I said I'd never pick Rutgers again. I'm gonna pick Michigan.
Dude, this is not the way you should be going, by the way, if you want to beat me.
I know. I'm gonna make it up next week, I decided.
All right, well, let's make a prop bet on this. How many interceptions do you think Artur? Also, by the way, who the hell names their kid Artur? But Artur Sikowski.
So
He's thrown
it's
15 interceptions.
I'm pretty sure that's like an Eastern European name or something. So
Wow,
there's
I'm a
there's other
jackass.
people with that name. Yeah, you kind of are.
I'm sorry, everyone. Logan, who's listening.
Yeah, if I put the over under at 2.5, which side are you gonna take?
The over.
You're gonna take the over? All right,
Hell
that's
yeah.
fine. All right,
Okay,
I'll take that.
perfect. Awesome, man. Well, that kind of covers it for our games. We talked about trying to get this at 30 minutes, and of course, we went over by about 15. Pretty common for us. We'll try harder next week, and we'll probably fail again, but at least you'll get awesome content that you can enjoy listening to on your morning and evening commute, or if you're Logan, when you're sitting at home by yourself because you are a pharmacist and have nothing to do during the day. So, with that being said, Ryan, any departing words before we sign off on our first podcast in a couple weeks?
No, but I did promise our friend Becca Brown that I would give her a shout out because she sat through the Wisconsin Nebraska game with me earlier this year, and I did not give her credit for that. So, Becca, if you're somehow still listening to this, this is your shout out.
That's pretty solid. Hi, Becca. This is Andrew. And just some real quick exciting news. Ryan, you and I talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to be hosting my own podcast on the side of this as well called the Locked On Hawkeyes. So make sure to give this podcast a follow. Just search Big Ten Sports. It should pop up. And then also give us a follow at Locked On Hawkeyes. And we are creating Twitter accounts for both. So there's going to be a Twitter account for the Big Ten Sports podcast. Ryan will not be on, but I will be running the Twitter account unless Ryan decides to love social media all of a sudden. But big things are popping, and when the college basketball season begins, tonight.
Yeah. So no, the college basketball season started on Tuesday, buddy. You got it.
I know, but I'm thinking about Iowa. Iowa's first game is tonight.
All right.
So that was I know what I said was wrong, but in my mind, the college basketball season begins tonight with Iowa playing. So we'll be covering a lot more of the college basketball season as we get out of the college football season. So thank you all for listening, and we will come back with you with another episode next week.